The Rock, seeking a peaceful break during a long drive, stops by a quiet roadside diner in a small town. He's been driving for hours and decides it's time to rest. As he enters, he's unaware that his arrival will soon attract the attention of a notorious biker gang. This gang, led by a man named Vance, is infamous for terrorizing anyone who doesn't align with their twisted views. Vance, known for his ruthlessness, immediately sees an opportunity to humiliate The Rock. He starts by taunting him with insults, testing his resolve. But when the verbal jabs don't work, Vance decides to escalate the situation. With a malevolent grin, he unleashes his vicious attack dog, expecting the powerful figure to cower in fear. However, what happens next shocks everyone in the diner. Stay tuned to see how this intense encounter unfolds. The sun is setting, casting a warm orange glow over the desolate highway. The Rock has been on the road for hours, his black pickup cutting through the quiet countryside. In the distance, a small diner appears like an oasis, promising warmth and rest. Its neon sign flickers gently against the dusky sky, offering a sense of comfort after a long drive. The sign reads, "Dixie's Diner," a humble establishment that looks like a welcoming place for weary travelers. The road leading to the diner is lined with a few scattered motorcycles, adding an unexpected edge to the otherwise tranquil setting. The Rock's sharp eyes take in the scene, sizing up the diner with a quiet intensity. "Looks decent enough," he mutters, his deep voice reverberating with the power of an approaching storm. With a decisive nod, he pulls his truck into an empty parking spot and shuts off the engine. The sudden silence contrasts with the road noise that had surrounded him for hours. He sits still for a moment, adjusting to the calm before exiting his vehicle. The gravel crunches under his heavy boots as he steps out, and his imposing presence fills the space. He walks toward the diner, his arrival announced by the jingle of the doorbell above. Inside, the diner's atmosphere shifts instantly. The air thickens, charged with an unspoken tension. The Rock's presence has the effect of a storm cloud hovering over a calm sea. The cozy, familiar setting, where locals gather to drink coffee and share stories, now feels on edge. At the far end of the diner, a group of 6 bikers, all clad in leather jackets, sit at a booth. Their leader, Vance, a towering figure, immediately locks eyes with The Rock as he enters. His icy blue gaze is sharp and calculating, like a predator eyeing his prey. Without a word, Vance subtly signals his men, and they fall silent, their hands instinctively resting on the weapons hidden beneath their jackets. Vance's voice, low and dangerous, cuts through the growing tension. "Trouble just walked in," he mutters to his closest biker. Meanwhile, The Rock, unaffected, glances away from the leather-clad group and sits down at a booth by the window, his back to the crowd. The patrons, momentarily unsettled by the bikers' reaction, continue their conversations, though a nervous energy lingers in the air. The bikers, however, remain watchful, their hostility barely contained. Emily, a young waitress, steps out from the kitchen, her eyes wide with anxiety. She hesitates for a moment, her pencil poised over her notepad. While taking The Rock's order, she is acutely aware of the tense atmosphere. She glances at the bikers, reading the room like an expert. Her voice shakes slightly as she asks for his order. "Just a coffee and a steak, coming right up," she replies, trying to steady herself. But before she can turn away, Vance's deep voice breaks through the uneasy quiet. "Well, well, if it ain't a hero come to save the day," he sneers, his tone dripping with sarcasm. His words are filled with venom, and the other bikers shift in their seats, their eyes burning with malicious anticipation. Vance's smile is cruel, a sign that something far worse is coming. The room goes still as the bikers' laughter fills the space. Vance's eyes flash with a malicious gleam as he turns his attention to Emily. His voice drops to a dangerous hiss. "Hey, sweetheart," he calls, his words sharp as a knife. Forget his order. We don't serve his kind here. His laughter echoes through the diner, harsh and mocking. The silence that follows feels heavy, suffocating. Every patron in the diner seems to freeze, their gazes fixed on the Rock, waiting for him to react to the cruel taunts. But the Rock remains calm, his face impassive as stone. His posture is unwavering, a fortress of controlled strength. His jaw clenched, he keeps his focus on the table before him, not allowing Vance's provocation to affect him. After a brief moment of tense silence, he speaks, his voice low and steady. "I'm just here for food, man," he says, his words carrying the weight of unspoken authority. "Let's not make this something it doesn't need to be." The pause that follows is thick with unspoken potential. Vance, not used to being ignored, laughs again, louder this time, his voice mocking. "You hear that, boys?" he taunts, looking at his gang with a grin. "He don't want trouble." He glances at his men, who snicker in agreement, feeding off his energy. Vance rises from his seat with an air of menace, his boots hitting the floor with the weight of a freight train. But the Rock remains seated, his gaze still fixed on the table. Slowly, deliberately, he raises his eyes to meet Vance's. Their stares lock, each man measuring the other with intensity. The air between them is thick with tension, and even the hum of the neon lights above seems to fade into silence. Emily, caught in the middle, watches the scene unfold with dread. Her fear of Vance battles with her empathy for the Rock. She stands frozen for a moment, unsure of what will happen next. But then, something in the Rock's subtle nod, an imperceptible motion that conveys more strength than 1,000 words, gives her the courage she needs. "Bring me the steak," the Rock repeats, his voice unwavering, his gaze unyielding as it remains locked on Vance. Emily, her hands trembling, retreats to the kitchen, her eyes giving Vance a worried look, as though silently warning him not to push any further. Vance's smirk falters. For the first time, a crack appears in his confident facade. The Rock's refusal to be intimidated, his calm defiance, has caught him off guard. The bikers, sensing a shift in the air, fall silent. What started as an attempt at humiliation is slowly beginning to unravel. The Rock, still seated and unmoving, is more than just a man in this moment. He is a force of nature, unshaken by the threats and mockery around him. And in that diner, on that quiet evening, something crucial changes in the air. Vance's power begins to slip, and the diner's patrons feel the shift in the atmosphere. The Rock, a symbol of unyielding strength and resolve, has quietly established that he will not be pushed around. The stage is set for what comes next, and the entire diner is waiting with bated breath. For a man like Vance, accustomed to being the alpha in any room, the clenching of his knuckles into meaty fists was a clear sign of the internal struggle raging within him. A battle was unfolding, one between his unchecked arrogance and the growing caution he was beginning to feel. His gang, sensing their leader's sudden uncertainty, huddled together in a conspiratorial cluster. Their whispers, like venomous snakes, carried the weight of intimidation, their words dripping with malice. One of the men, his scarred face a twisted mask of malice, leaned in close to Vance, eyes narrowed like a predator, ready to strike. "He's got some nerve," he hissed, his voice carrying the sharpness of a dagger. The others nodded in agreement, their restless bodies itching for a fight, their eyes burning with hostility. The chorus of rancor grew louder, feeding off each other's anger like a pack of wolves scenting blood. Another biker, his eyes gleaming with sadistic delight, added his own venom to the mix. "He ain't from around here," he spat, his words laced with disdain. "Maybe we should show him how we handle outsiders." The sentence hung in the air like a guillotine blade, suspended and poised to strike at any moment. Vance, his grin now an unsettling expression of pleasure, signaled his agreement. "Oh, I've got an idea," he purred, his words sliding off his tongue like poisoned honey. With a simple nod, one of the bikers left the diner, his booted footsteps receding into the night. And then it came, a low, guttural growl that sent a chill racing down the spines of the unsuspecting patrons. The once tense diner erupted in chaos, the air crackling with unease. Patrons shifted in their seats like spooked cattle, their eyes wide with fear. The windows, now grimy and clouded with impending danger, reflected the terror that gripped the room. Outside, a monstrous Rottweiler stood motionless, its black coat gleaming faintly in the dim light. The dog was the epitome of raw power, its muscles coiled, teeth bared in a snarl of pure animosity. It locked eyes with the Rock, who remained utterly unaffected by the dog's menacing presence. Vance, delighted by the suffering he was about to cause, broke into a sinister chuckle that rippled through the room. His eyes gleamed with sadistic pleasure as he casually motioned toward the door. "How about a little game?" he asked, his voice oozing venomous mirth. "You step outside, and we'll see how fast you can run. If you get to your truck before Fluffy here tears your throat out, I'll let you drive away. What do you say, hero?" The Rock, his patience seemingly endless, let out a sigh that conveyed an overwhelming sense of world-weary annoyance. Vance's threats, for all their viciousness, seemed nothing more than a trivial inconvenience to him. Without shifting his posture, he turned his gaze toward the snarling beast. His expression remained calm, almost dismissive, as if the whole situation were as mundane as a passing weather report. "That your dog?" he asked, his voice laden with disinterest. Vance, intoxicated by the rush of power he felt from threatening someone whose size and strength could rival his own, leaned in close. His smirk twisted into a serpentine smile as he relished the chance to toy with the Rock. "What's the matter?" he purred, his voice dripping with malice. "Scared?" The challenge hung in the air, demanding a response, but the Rock, unruffled by Vance's provocation, remained impassive. His eyes, cold as steel, locked onto Vance's with a chilling detachment. The Rock, almost disinterested by the escalating tension, deliberately picked up his coffee mug. As he brought it to his lips and took a long, languid sip, it was as though the entire world around him slowed. He placed the mug back on the table with calculated ease, the glint of amusement in his eyes a sharp contrast to the dark mood of the diner. "If you want to act tough," he drawled, his voice calm and steady, "maybe you should fight your own battles. Or is that too much for a big man like you to handle?" The laughter that erupted from Vance's crew, once filled with malicious glee, now rang with a discordant note of uncertainty. It was as if the very atmosphere inside the diner had shifted, becoming a tuning fork for the tension in the air. What had once been an air of confident menace now seemed to tremble, unsettled by the Rock's unflinching composure. Even the bikers who had reveled in their leader's threats now found themselves unsure of the outcome. The Rock's display of calm strength, his defiance against the dog, and Vance's provocations had introduced a crack in their assumed dominance. As the silence stretched on, the bikers looked to Vance for a sign of what to do next. But Vance, for the first time, was at a loss for words. His plan to intimidate and humiliate the Rock had backfired. Instead of shrinking away, the Rock had risen above it, standing tall and unfazed by the escalating threats. His ability to maintain composure in the face of danger was something Vance had not anticipated. The tension in the diner was palpable, but the Rock's gaze remained fixed on Vance, unwavering. The game had changed, and with every passing moment, the biker gang's confidence continued to erode. As the tension in the room intensified, subtle shifts in power rippled through the diner. The men shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their bravado faltering like a mirage in the sweltering desert heat. Yet, amidst the chaos, the Rock stood as an unwavering island of calm. His features were as solid as granite, unyielding and unmoved. His stoic presence seemed to absorb all the tension around him, leaving no room for the intimidation that the gang had tried to impose. Vance's facade of arrogance began to crumble, his once confident grin twisting into a grimace of barely contained anger. "All right, big guy," he growled, his words dripping with venom as they shot toward the rock. "You want to play smart? Let's see how smart you are when Max is coming for your throat." With a sharp snap of his fingers, Vance unleashed the Rottweiler, a hulking beast that sprang forward with powerful muscles rippling under its black coat. Its teeth were bared, ready to tear flesh from bone. A collective gasp swept through the diner, a sound rising from the throats of every patron as they witnessed the terrifying scene unfold. The air grew thick with disbelief. The patrons, who had once been lost in their own conversations, now found their attention fixed entirely on the showdown that had overtaken the room. Their eyes were wide with fear and anticipation as the savage Rottweiler barreled toward the rock. But the rock remained unshaken. A pillar of stoic calm amidst the chaos, he waited for the perfect moment. His muscles tensed, coiled like a spring, ready to release. To those who didn't know him, his inaction might have seemed like a fatal mistake, but the rock was in complete control. He had been in situations like this before, moments requiring immense patience, a cool head, and the ability to read the opponent's every move. Like a panther springing at its prey, the rock moved with lethal precision. His body blurred as he shot forward, his arm reaching out with the speed and power of a seasoned fighter. He grabbed the Rottweiler midair, locking his massive hand around the dog's collar, halting its ferocious charge in an instant. The force of his grip stopped the beast dead in its tracks, the dog's momentum suddenly arrested by the rock's unyielding strength. Time seemed to slow as the room held its collective breath. The shocked gasps of the onlookers hung in the air, suspended by the sheer tension of the moment. The Rottweiler, teeth still bared and snarling, was now inches from the rock's face, its growls barely audible over the dead silence of the diner. All eyes were fixed on the scene, bodies rigid, unable to move as the unbelievable spectacle unfolded. Vance, who had watched the scene with growing confidence, now stood frozen in disbelief. His face, once an open mask of triumph, was now pale and slack, his mouth hanging open like a door on its hinges. The shock that shot through him was palpable, like an electric current racing through his body. His plan had backfired. Meanwhile, the rock remained calm, his face impassive, as he continued to hold the Rottweiler in place. The dog thrashed and snapped, trying desperately to break free, but it was clear that the struggle was futile. The rock's grip was absolute, unshaken by the power of the beast before him. His body stood firm, a living wall between the Rottweiler's rage and the frightened onlookers, all of whom remained rooted in place, mesmerized by his control. With a voice that resonated with quiet authority, the rock spoke, his tone gentle, almost soothing, as he addressed the snarling animal in front of him. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his words flowing with a calm power that seemed to sink into the Rottweiler's wild instincts. For a moment, the beast hesitated, its growls softening into a low, hesitant rumble. The room held its breath. It was as though the rock had suddenly transformed, his raw strength giving way to an innate understanding of the animal's aggression. The tension in the room became palpable, thick enough to feel like a tangible presence. The once ferocious Rottweiler, who had been poised to tear into its prey, now appeared subdued, its muscles still tense, but no longer thrashing. The savage animal, which had been unleashed with the intent to cause harm, was now under the rock's control. The silence in the diner was profound, broken only by a few faint, incredulous gasps from the onlookers who couldn't quite comprehend the spectacle they had just witnessed. The rock's calm presence had tamed the beast, not through brute force, but through the quiet strength of his authority. And in that moment, the room was filled with a stillness that spoke volumes. The gang, including Vance, stood in stunned silence, unable to process what had just transpired. What had started as an intense, potentially violent confrontation had turned into a display of pure dominance, not of violence, but of control. And the entire diner had witnessed it. The air hung heavy with a quiet awe, the patrons unable to tear their eyes away from the Rock and the Rottweiler, both locked in an uneasy but undeniable truce. Vance's gang, the same men who had moments ago been brimming with threats and intimidation, now exchanged nervous glances. Their leader, the one who had orchestrated this entire scene, was left speechless. His once powerful facade now shattered in the face of a man who had shown them all what true strength was. And the Rock, still holding the Rottweiler effortlessly, continued to exude that quiet strength that had rendered everyone in the diner not only awestruck, but also fearful of underestimating him ever again. The onlookers had just witnessed what could only be described as a miraculous display of control. The Rock, his grip now gentler but no less firm, slowly eased the Rottweiler to the floor. It was a gesture that spoke of both tenderness and authority, one that balanced dominance with an understanding of the animal's behavior. As the beast's paws touched the ground, its ferocity subdued, the Rock placed a firm but reassuring hand on its neck. The Rottweiler, once a savage beast ready to tear into its target, seemed to recognize the folly of its actions. Its proud head lowered, its tail tucked between its legs, and it slunk away from its would-be aggressor, now docile in the face of the Rock's quiet command. What had been, only moments ago, the stage for an epic showdown between man and beast had become a scene frozen in disbelief. Vance's gang, who had been so brazen in their display of superiority, now found themselves speechless, their jaws slack with astonishment. They were no longer the dominant force in the room. Instead, they sat like statues, their eyes glued to the Rock's every movement, as if he had transformed before them from an ordinary man into something far greater, some kind of superhuman creature. The atmosphere shifted palpably, the power dynamics utterly upended. If looks could kill, Vance's glare alone would have turned the Rock to ash. Mortification painted Vance's face, his fiery crimson skin giving his once defiant features a comical, almost clownish quality. "What the—" Vance began, his words tumbling over one another as the fury within him bubbled to the surface. His voice was hoarse, his throat tight with rage, but there was a discernible tremor in it that betrayed the unease gnawing at him. For all his bravado, for all the swagger that had once defined him, he was now small, his machismo no longer an impenetrable mask, but a fragile front for his own insecurities. The Rock, however, remained unshaken. His cool exterior only served to mask the inferno of fury that was simmering beneath. Rising from his seat with the slow, deliberate grace of a coiled python, he looked down at Vance with an intensity that was both chilling and unwavering. His knuckles popped, the sound reverberating like a menacing prelude to the violence that was about to erupt. The tension in the air was thick, almost unbearable. He leveled his gaze at Vance, his voice low and heavy with a promise of retribution. "Your turn," he growled, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Vance, his eyes widening with sudden realization, understood the gravity of the mistake he had just made. He had picked a fight with the wrong man. There was no turning back now. With a roar of rage, he hurled himself at the Rock, his fist rocketing toward his target with the speed and force of a bullet. But despite Vance's brute strength, he was no match for the lightning-fast reflexes of the Rock. With the agility of a seasoned fighter, the Rock sidestepped the punch effortlessly, moving with a fluidity that belied his massive frame. He dodged Vance's attack like a matador avoiding a charging bull, the very air around him seeming to shift as he made his move. Vance, his momentum carrying him forward uncontrollably, found himself off balance, vulnerable. In that split second, the Rock seized the opportunity. With a brutal right hook that could have knocked a charging rhino off its feet, he struck. The impact was devastating. Vance, stunned and helpless, was sent reeling, his jaw snapping sideways as his teeth rattled like dice in a cup. His body sailed through the air, crashing into a nearby table with a deafening crash, the sound of broken wood and splintered glass punctuating his defeat. But the Rock was not done. His rage, fueled by a relentless drive to defend himself, transformed him into a whirlwind of violence. The gang, whose loyalty to Vance had once seemed unshakable, was now overshadowed by their primal desire to save their own skins. They lunged toward the Rock, fists raised in angry defiance, but their efforts were futile. The Rock was a force of nature. His limbs moved like a symphony of destruction. Elbows cracked against bone, shoulders slammed into opponents, sending them flying across the room with bone-jarring force. In mere seconds, the gang was sprawled across the diner's floor, groaning in pain as broken furniture lay scattered around them like the aftermath of a storm. Vance, his face now a bloody mask of defeat, struggled to rise from the debris of shattered wood and glass. Blood seeped from his nose, staining his lips and chin with a crimson sheen. His breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. His eyes, once burning with animosity, were now glazed over in shock, and his body trembled with the effort of staying upright. He tried to speak, but his voice was little more than a hoarse whisper, a far cry from the cocky swagger that had once defined him. The Rock, towering over Vance, lowered himself to the defeated man's level, his frame casting a shadow that seemed to swallow Vance whole. His voice, though soft, cut through the air like a scalpel, precise and unforgiving. "Strength," the Rock said, his words heavy with meaning, "comes from knowing when to fight and when to walk away." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "You think you're strong, but you're nothing but a bully, like rats fleeing a sinking ship." Vance and his cronies, their bodies battered and bruised by the Rock's wrath, slowly dragged themselves to their feet. The sight of the once feared gang now slinking away with their tails between their legs was a stark contrast to the brutal aggression they had exuded only minutes earlier. They stumbled out of the diner, their limping gait a testament to the price they had paid for underestimating the Rock's strength of character. The atmosphere in the diner shifted, the once tense air now infused with a sense of finality, as though a heavy weight had been lifted. And then, as if a dam had broken, the silence that had held the room captive erupted into a thunderous ovation. The patrons, emboldened by the Rock's display of courage and strength, rose to their feet. The diner was alive with the sound of cheers, applause, and whistles. The sound reverberated throughout the room, an outpouring of gratitude and respect. Emily, her face lit with admiration, smiled shyly at the Rock. The fear that had once clouded her eyes was replaced by a newfound respect. She found herself unable to contain her emotions as she stepped forward, her voice shaky but full of gratitude. "Your stake's on the house," she stammered, her words tumbling out in a rush of awe. And a free cup of coffee," she added, blushing at her own spontaneity. The Rock smirked, his expression one of quiet amusement. The corner of his mouth lifted in a small, knowing smile. He nodded at Emily, the respect in his gaze softening the otherwise stoic demeanor. "I'll take it to go," he replied, his voice warm with humor. Caught up in the electric current of the moment, Emily laughed in genuine delight. Her exhaustion and fear, so palpable only moments before, now seemed to evaporate in the wake of the Rock's presence. She hurried to the kitchen, eager to box up the steak and coffee, a tangible reminder of the unforgettable evening they had all just experienced.